Hello there, this is James as Crafty James 1978, and for the last 6 months I have spent far too much time talking over Skype to my good friend Alex, and being forced at gunpoint to watch various movies and episodes of TV programs with him, most of which were entirely forgettable, but some of which are definitely worth mentioning, even if it's only because they were so utterly appalling that they've inspired me to create something better. As always, there are links all listed down to the underbar. I ask everyone to please subscribe to Alex's channel, and if you like the sound of anything that I mention here, then do please feel free to check it out. But without further ado though, here are my very brief opinions of some of the best and worst of the movies and TV programs that Alex has shared with me. Not full reviews, mind you, because I'm too busy and there's not really that much to say, but either way though, here goes. This Is England is a very interesting movie directed by Shane Meadows about a young boy in the early 1980s who gets caught up in the skinhead movement. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this movie is that although today the word skinhead is synonymous with racist or neo-Nazi, the film shows the true roots of the skinhead movement, white people who were fans of reggae, ska and other Caribbean music. It was only later that white nationalists infiltrated the movement, and indeed, the whole plot of the movie is a dramatization of this, with the group being happy and inclusive until a white nationalist drives them apart and causes nothing but strife and suffering. On top of this, the movie also explores the true motivation of white nationalists and every other ideology that appeals to angry young men: isolation, alienation, unemployment, and the need for someone to blame. In contrast to this, there is no single aspect of Legally Blonde the musical that is not an insult to all of humanity. It is the manifestation of everything that I truly despise about musicals, and demonstrates that as a writer, I must create human and three-dimensional female and LGBTQ characters to save us all from the gut-wrenching one-dimensional cliches, and I call upon all other writers to do the same. As for Phantom of the Opera, the only truly memorable aspect of that musical was at the very end when the Phantom released his prisoners, understanding that if you genuinely love someone, then you will set them free, metaphorically as well as literally. As a matter of fact, when the Phantom said, "Take him and go," I actually muttered, "So, you are human after all." Next up, the movie Amelie is without a doubt the most unbelievably French romantic comedy ever created, with French in bold typeface and block capitals. The individual characters and their relationships, the plot, the story, the underlying message, they were all completely obscured by the 200-foot-tall flashing neon sign reading French, 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 as well as the director's obsessive desire for this stereotypically French town to remain trapped like a fly in amber forever in the summer of 1953. In fact, all three of the French films that Alex has shared with me to date have, to a greater or lesser extent, been spoiled by the superficial bullshit, because while the opening of A Very Long Engagement was absolutely spectacular, who, in the name of the Great Holy Donkey, puts a profound and deeply moving climax at the beginning of the film? The opening scene of the movie shows a full-scale crucifix in the trenches of the First World War that has been damaged by enemy artillery, meaning that most of the life-sized model of Christ's body has been blown apart, leaving only his head, half of his torso, and one arm swinging from a single nail. This image is so profound because it perfectly encapsulates everything that writers and poets have been trying to express for almost a century. Not only the destruction of the body in the First World War, but of faith, hope, and humanity itself. Because beyond the 20 million or more people who were slaughtered in that conflict, the First World War utterly destroyed the principle of the Enlightenment, the idea that humanity was fundamentally good, that knowledge would free us from tyranny and barbarism, and that technological development would create a utopia for all humanity devoid of suffering and pain. Remember, the First World War and the Second World War had nothing to do with religion, and the Nazis exterminated more people for being communist than they ever did for being Jewish. But of course, that is only the opening scene, and after that, the film focuses on the fate of 5 French soldiers who are sentenced to death after injuring themselves in the hopes of being sent home. Men who shot themselves or allowed themselves to be shot because they could no longer bear the horrors that they witnessed every day. As I watched the movie, I lost count of all of what today would be punishable as war crimes. So excuse me, my friends, for not giving a flying fuck about the bulk of the story. One girl after the war, desperately struggling to find her fiancé, convinced that he is still alive, though he was one of the 5 men who were sentenced to death and sent unarmed into no man's land. Meaning that even if he wasn't shot or blown apart by artillery, he would eventually have starved to death. On the flip side of that coin, of course, Betty Blue's incredibly profound and deeply disturbing climax is actually at the end of the movie, so that's a plus. However, the path that the story takes to get there is way too long and full of pleasant and somewhat enjoyable, but unrelated and ultimately irrelevant fluff. A young man falls in love with a beautiful and passionate but highly unstable young woman who is prone to irrational outbursts and violent fits of rage. And after a full goddamn mother-buggering, otter-fondling, squirrel-teabagging hour of quirky romantic comedy, it becomes obvious that in spite of the man's insistence that she is only ever violent around her time of the month, she is developing full-blown catatonic schizophrenia. She is delusional, she hears voices, she sits for hours motionless and transfixed. Having believed that she was pregnant, she goes completely off the rails when the test comes back negative. And in the end, there's only one way that he can save her. Moving on though, A Day in the Death of Joe Egg shares the same fundamental problem as the French films that I've just reviewed, namely that the superfluous fluff can easily overshadow the dramatic, profound, and deeply disturbing conclusion. Because while it doesn't put its climax at the beginning like in the movie A Very Long Engagement, the play does continue for far too long after the crescendo has been reached. As a matter of fact, just as a very brief side note, if you've read my collection of short stories available now on Amazon, again the link is listed down as the underbar, nudge nudge, wink wink, hint hint, and believe that the stories were too short, a huge part of the reason for this is that I always tend to cut out the trivial irrelevancies. I get to the mother-buggering, squirrel-teabagging, otter-fondling point, and I end the story as soon as that point has been made. You see, as far as I'm concerned, it's all about impact. And just in case you believe that I'm going to bash everything that Alex has shared with me, aside from the first movie, The Reader is by far one of the greatest English language films that I have ever seen in my life. And while I can't possibly hope to tell you anything about the story without spoiling it completely, anyone who thinks that the first part of the movie is nothing but an older woman having far too much sex with a teenage boy is a fucking idiot. Full stop. Because during the scene in the church, when she hears the choir sing, music is that which cannot be put into words, but is far too important to remain silent. Returning to the bashing, however, as far as I'm concerned, Sherlock was the final nail in the coffin of the entire murder mystery genre, because having always known that all detective dramas use exactly the same cliches, the same plot points, the same devices, the same themes, and the same quote-unquote dramatic twists that Arthur Conan Doyle first developed for the original Sherlock Holmes stories, this series is nothing but a rehashing of those very same plot points, character traits, and general themes, but set in the 21st century. That's it. It has brought the entire genre full circle like a snake eating its own tail. Like in the episode of Star Trek in which Data is playing Sherlock Holmes on the holodeck, and ordered to create an original Holmes-type mystery, the computer mixes up elements from several previous stories. Stephen Moffat does this and adds a 21st century twist. Full stop. You can almost spot the points at which he copy-pasted entire sections of the original stories into his scripts, and then tweaked them a little in order to make them fit. So, as I say, having always hated Sherlock Holmes, I genuinely want to thank Stephen Moffat for showing me just how creatively bankrupt the entire murder mystery genre truly is, especially now that Jonathan Creek, the only genuinely creative mystery series in recent memory, has been ploughed right into the ground. Because when you strip away all of the individual character traits and the window dressing that each series uses to differentiate itself from every other, they are nothing but the same mysteries and the same solutions, the same cliches, and the same lazy plot devices designed to provoke suspense in the audience over and over and over and over and over and over again. Finally, though, Alex has spent a great deal of the last 6 months sharing many episodes of Doctor Who with me. So many, in fact, that I now feel qualified to make a separate video offering my suggestions on how it can overcome its flaws and reach its full potential. But in the meantime, though, the 2 episodes which genuinely stood out and deserve to be mentioned in this video were the 2-parter Silence in the Library and the second part of another 2-part story entitled Family of Blood. Although the rest of the Riversong storyline ultimately fell apart as it was shoehorned into unrelated episodes and weighed down by cheesy soap opera bullshit, the introduction of Professor Riversong in Silence in the Library was unbelievably well executed, and was the first time that I have seen a series attempt such an incredibly creative and overarching plotline since Babylon 5. For those of you who don't know, the Doctor and Riversong are both time travellers who, for lack of a better term, are travelling in opposite directions. So the first time that the Doctor ever meets her in the library is the last time that she will ever see him. From her perspective, she'd had countless adventures with the Doctor, but he had absolutely no idea who she was, and neither did we. So indeed, the entire story is still unfolding in the current series. And on top of that, the episode itself was first class. But far more than being well executed and full of potential, however, the sacrifice of John Smith in Family of Blood is, in my less than humble opinion, the very pinnacle of the series. To hide from his enemies, the Doctor made himself human and became a teacher named John Smith in 1913. But more than a mere disguise, John Smith was a real human being with dreams and desires of his own, who fell in love. All that he wanted was to live, to be with the woman who he loved, and to have the simple things that make life worth living, a family and a home. But when the aliens attacked, he had no choice but to die, so that the Doctor could return. He was a braver man than you, in the end, that ordinary man. You chose to change. He chose to die. Answer me this, just one question, that's all. If the Doctor had never visited us, if he'd never chosen this place, on a whim, would anyone here have died? You can go.